Millions of years ago, out of a vast expanse of ocean, a great fire erupted. Pele, Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes, fought a mighty battle with the gods of the sea.
One of the real popular ideas about why Hawaii is here in the middle of the Pacific is that we are sitting on a hot spot. And remember, it's an idea. Nobody's actually seen one. But the idea says that there's a place down deep in the earth that is hot and brings up molten magma to the surface. It punches through the Earth's crust and forms volcanoes. Now, why isn't there just a big lump of lava and a big volcano here? Well, that's because the Pacific crust is actually moving over this hotspot, and that's why we have a long chain. We have Hawaii is the youngest island, Kauai is the oldest among the 8, but the island chain actually goes all the way up to the edge of the Pacific, to islands that are more than 80 million years old. Well, actually not islands anymore, they're below the surface of the ocean because they've been eroded so much. But this hotspot currently is active here. That's why we have active volcanism here. It used to be under all the other islands when they were active. I think Kauai is about 4 million years old. And there's a new volcano forming offshore that hasn't broken the surface of the ocean that we call Loihi. All active over the big hotspot. The reason that Hawaii is one of the best places in the world for studying volcanoes is that they're relatively safe. That was recognized over 100 years ago, and that's why the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory is here today. Kilauea and Mauna Loa actually erupt fairly frequently, so there's a lot of opportunity to study eruptions. And also they mostly erupt non-explosively, so they're relatively safe to study.
Out of this struggle, these islands were born. They became the most isolated islands on Earth, barren rock, absent of all life. Over millions of years, life arrived from distant shores. Carried by the wind and the waves, only a few survived the journey. A new arrival not more than once every 25,000 years. The tiniest of creatures came to the islands in raindrops. Seeds found passage on the wings of butterflies and birds.
Sam Gon returned to the forests of his childhood as a student of Hawaii's native culture and as director of science for the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii. In the native view, creation occurred in the time of Po, the sweating time. the time when steam poured from the earth like sweat. Darkness yielded to light. The sky turned over.
Life yet arrives to these islands, at first by the air. The jet stream runs from Southeast Asia over the Central Pacific and peters out just about where the Hawaiian Islands are. So you could have seeds and insects and all kinds of materials carried from Asia across the jet streams, but they fall out onto the Hawaiian Islands. That meant that whatever got here had the place pretty much to themselves, and they were free to proliferate into different directions ecologically. More and more of these simple plants land and start to grow. The lichens and mosses start to break the rocks down. Life builds on life, and soon you have forests that ran all the way from sea level up to about 9,000 or 10,000 feet on the mountain. The Hawaiian Islands are an amazing place on this planet. 2,500 miles away from any other continent. We're isolated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and yet we're high islands. That is, we can go all the way from sea level to snow-capped peaks. And therefore, you have all kinds of habitats, everything from coastal to rainforest to cooler mountain slopes to snow-capped mountain tops. And if you picture what an amazing place that would be for people to live in, when our Hawaiian ancestors landed in the Hawaiian Islands, they found this stupendous set of ecological settings. You could find amazing things. If you needed huge trees for canoes, for voyaging, if you needed medicinal plants in the lower forest, if you needed rich fishing grounds to feed yourselves, if you needed wide, wet valleys prime for agricultural development into Taro Lo'i, it was just an amazingly alive universe to live in, and also an extremely complex one. We're high islands, we have interesting weather patterns that make one side of an island wet and the other side of an island dry. If you're living in these places and if you pay attention to the world around you, you begin to notice the patterns in the places that you live. And that turns you into a scientist. You find yourself observing the conditions on the land and the sea, what makes a place perfect for agriculture, how you can take the flow of water in a stream and spread it across the wide valley bottom, how to engineer the walls of your terraces so that water moves slowly down through each level without eroding the land, and yet providing all the water that the taro needs to live. If you are a fisherman, you need to know the conditions of the sea. You need to know where the fish live, where the reefs are, what kinds of fish live in the deeps versus the shallows. So you become a taxonomist. You learn the names of the different plants and animals. And as I mentioned, 90% of the things that were here are not found anywhere else on Earth. So Hawaiians had to learn from scratch the different plants and animals and give names to each of them as they develop their society in these islands.
So there's always an interrelationship between human life and these things around us, the grass that grows, the stream that runs, the voice of the stream and the voice of the wind that helps us come to a realization that we're not separate from it. Haumea is our mother, she's our earth. And she breathes and she lives. And she grows. And everything that Haumea grows is to our benefit. As long as we take care of Haumea, Haumea, our mother, will take care of us. As long as we take care of this, of Kane's work and Lono's work, they're going to take care of us.
When you think about the relationships in ancient Hawaii between the living world and various people in them, one of the finest expressions of that can be found in Hawaiian chant. Hawaiian chant weaves elements of the natural world into what the chanter is saying and what the chanter is feeling. And I'd like to share just a little bit of Hawaiian chant. that happens to be relevant to this particular island, the island of Oahu. Ohu ohu Oahu I ka le ohi alaka la'au pua ulahi kina kea komohana. Komo ka ohu I ka hana komo apana hana ta ohu e ho ohu I te ala ohia. Ohu kani ohi awehi wa no hotu aiwi. And what that chant said is Oahu is wreathed by thick clouds on the mountains, which often is the case, and in fact is the case today. And it is also adorned by the ohia laka, that is a tree that has red lehua blossoms on one side and white on the other. It's a mythical tree from very old stories, and that's woven into the traditions of Oahu and indeed all of the Hawaiian Islands. The ohu, this mist, comes in on its appointed duties. That is the idea in Hawaiian thought that everything in the world has something to do, has a role to play in the universe. And the role of the ohia in this chant is to mix the fragrance of the lehua. That is, it comes in and it gathers the smell, the fragrance of the lehua blossoms from the different trees, and it mixes it all about as it moves through the uplands of Oahu. And this is the ohu kani ohia. That means the ohu that quenches the thirst of the ohia trees. And that harkens to the realization by ancient Hawaiians that not only does the rain water the earth, but the mists as it passes through the trees also provides moisture to the land. And so in this one little short chant is a realization of some of the ecological relationships that we were talking about.